Attack on Planet Falrus by Joanna Monigatti. Chapter 5. Dr. Saki Volton picked up the nuclear phone receiver on the third ring. He had a good mind to slam it back down, but he didn't want to make matters worse. He was hungry and tired and hadn't the energy to sustain a scene. "Hello?" he said rather impatiently. The voice at the other end was babbling on about Doviania's experiment on diffraction patterns. The research was 3 years old, but all of a sudden everyone wanted it, and fast. This caller was asking if the research data could be nuclear-mailed to the Loch Valley Institute. Dr. Volton said yes, it could. He had a feeling of déjà vu as he put the receiver back down gently. Morale in the office was rather low than the normal today. The common office was now crowded, and it reminded him of the high street stores during sales. Dr. Demba had been in a rotten mood when he had arrived at 1 p.m. He had immediately cancelled Dr. Tundi's examiner's meeting, which hadn't made the old man exactly thrilled. Balsani Venissa's joke about 3 skunks on vacation in Freya hadn't really helped either. Barlet Droba's funny one-liners were the only safe stress relievers. Dr. Volton had received news of a project to build an artificial ozone layer just inside Lindesimark, to be undertaken by the Barnanti-side space. He'd heard that the idea had been Dr. Droba's. The layer could prevent the sun's energy from being tapped by the old world life forms. So far, though, it was all theory. No one really knew if it would work. The only good news on the horizon was that Dr. Suvana's diffraction research could help test this new idea at Barnanti. Nearly all the universities and physics institutes were calling in now to obtain the data. At least some people had something to work on. Dr. Volton was at his wits' end. Sure, he was developing nuclear magnetic warheads to go with Book's transportron, but that in itself was an easy task. In any case, it would be absolutely useless if the transportron failed to work. Finding nothing to do presently, he decided to go down for a light meal in the canteen. He made his way downstairs. On the corridor, he bumped into a young scientist from Dionysi University named Dr. Quiman Grui. Quiman was holding up what looked like a diamond ring. "I found this on the floor of the physics library this morning, Dr. Volton," he said. "Would you know who it belongs to?" Dr. Volton took the ring and held it up to the light. It sparkled brightly. "No," he replied. "Sadly, I don't know anyone around here who could afford a gem like that. Welcome to the poverty-stricken world of academia, kid," he said jocularly. "But I'll show it to the others just in case." He took the ring from the young man. "Thank you, Dr. Volton," Quiman said, and walked on towards the chemistry department. Saki regarded the ring. He was puzzled by it. Something wasn't quite right. He was sure it was too expensive looking to belong to any of his colleagues. Not that they were poor. It was just that it was not the kind of thing they wore, and definitely not to work. Still, he thought it could belong to one of the new scientists from out of town. There had been a lot of new recruits to the new projects they were working on. He went back to his office and placed the ring in a drawer at his desk. He would leave a note on the notice board and also mention it at the project meeting first thing tomorrow morning. He headed back towards the canteen. Jajan Kotak's program of training had consisted of 8 hours of hypnotism a day for a week. He had also been taught everything there was to know about life on that faraway planet, Falrus. Today, his final day of training, he now spoke 2 new languages, Corpontian, which he spoke like a native, and Falrusian, which he still struggled with. He now spoke with a slight stutter, and his eyesight wasn't quite what it used to be. He now wore glasses. His recollections of the 7th district were now a little dim. He now remembered home as a big city. He could sing quite well all of a sudden. He had acquired a new mole behind his left ear. Funny, he hadn't noticed that before. There was a whole list of things about his identity that had changed over the past 4 or 5 days. He now had an older brother and 2 younger sisters. They seemed to have sprung up on him out of the blue, not to talk of his mother, who seemed to have gained 3 stones in a week. He was confused, very confused. He even seemed to have acquired a new name. But this army guy was telling him he would get over his confusion. This doctor he saw every few hours was convincing him every so often that this was all part of growing up. Everyone went through a bit of confusion at some stage in his or her life. Commander Nellit had done a good job, a great job. The 10 children under his charge had all graduated from his training program with flying colors. They all knew who they were and what their tasks were. He was pleased with himself, very pleased. He was looking a promotion right in the face. He looked at his watch once again as he heard footsteps. He was a little nervous, but who wouldn't be at a time like this? It wasn't often you got to prove yourself to the president and Commander Bonzok. It was a chance in a million. He intended to make the best of it. The double doors opened and an armed guard walked in. One of the children sneezed, but he hardly noticed. He was looking anxiously at the guard who had just entered. The guard jerked his head towards the door, the cue for Nellit to take the children into the adjoining room where the president and Commander Bonzok were waiting for him. He obeyed. The room into which he marched the 7 boys and 3 girls was no smaller than a large auditorium. It was packed with scores of men dressed the same way as the guard who had just signaled to him. The president was sitting at a long table on a platform with Commander Bonzok sitting beside him. Commander Nellit marched the children to a space just in front of the platform and then turned to address the military personnel seated on the platform. Your Excellency, distinguished officers, these children and I are ready to begin, he said in a tight voice, barely concealing his nervousness. Right, said the president. We shall waste no time then. Proceed. Commander Bonzok got up from his chair and came down to the area where Nellit and the children were. He had a sheet of paper in his hand. Exchange number 20, he boomed. A little girl straightened up and said, Yes, sir, in a tiny voice. Commander Bonzok compared her to a list of figures he had on his sheet of paper and also to a photograph. He seemed satisfied, for he nodded before continuing. What's your name? He asked, this time more gently. Trinshuvem, the girl replied. Where do you come from? Cranbetty. What does your father do? He works at the Cranbetty Galaxy Observation Institute. The questioning went on until Commander Bonzok was satisfied with the interviewee. One by one, all of the 10 children were interrogated in this way. None of them made a single mistake. Commander Nellit smiled. He knew the president and Commander Bonzok were happy. That made him happy. In 3 days' time, the next batch of his pupils would be tried and tested just like this batch. They too would be perfect. His life was becoming a dream. He was enjoying it. "Have you seen to it that the transportron is ready?" Commander Bonsok asked 2 officers amongst those sitting on the platform. They said yes. "Well," said the president, "I guess these kids here are ready to be dispatched. Good work, boys. I'll see to it that you are duly rewarded." The children were led out of the room and out of the building into a waiting car. Jajan could hear a group of children chanting an unintelligible rhyme. He had chanted something similar a week ago, but he couldn't remember exactly what now. The soldier had been right. He had grown up now. He was now sure he was indeed Faran Moras. Half an hour later, he found himself in a large room that contained 10 metallic machines that looked like little houses. He was led to one of them by a guard who opened a door and asked him to sit on a seat in the interior of the machine. He was frightened. The little chamber made his skin crawl. He didn't like the look of it. "Come on, we haven't got all day," the guard said to him. "It's all right, nothing's going to happen." Jajan climbed into the machine and sat on the seat. From the corner of his eye, he could see the other children doing the same. He began to relax. He realized that the interior of this machine was much smaller than he had expected from the outside. The walls were very thick. The guard closed the door and pressed a button. He began to feel dizzy as lights flashed in front of him and a loud purring noise emanated from somewhere within the machine. His ears popped as his body fought to keep up with the high pressure building up around him. He felt light all of a sudden. Then he was flung into oblivion as the chamber began to revolve, at first slowly, then faster, faster, faster. The last thing he remembered thinking of was a woman he vaguely recognized. She was screaming, and a man he was sure he knew was standing beside her, comforting her. As his body approached absolute weightlessness, his final thought was, "Mom!" Chapter 6. On Tuesday evening, Dad was reading the Old Expond Science Review out on the front porch. We had had supper 2 hours earlier, followed by a film on nuclear TV. For once, I had no homework to worry about. Johnny had taken care of that. I decided to join Dad on the porch. I hadn't spoken to him in private for a while. Now seemed like a good time. I got up and went outside. He looked up and smiled at me. "Hello, Giran," he said cheerily. "Hi, Dad," I replied, and went to sit next to him. I took in the fresh night air gratefully. It had been raining for some time now, and the air had cleared up. The street was quiet. Our neighbors were either supping or relaxing in front of the NTV or asleep. "Don't you just love the stillness of the night?" Dad remarked, as if reading my thoughts. "Lovely," I said pleasantly. "What are you reading, Dad?" "Some article on diffraction," he replied with a chuckle. "It's really interesting. Maybe you should read it when I'm finished." Normally, I would decline politely, but tonight, I thought it best to oblige. I would take it to Square to translate it for me. "Sure, Dad." I let a few minutes pass. "Dad, when next are we going to the local hills?" I asked him. "The local hills? We've just been there, haven't we? We won't be going back for a while, I don't think. Not until after our vacation in Pascuando. Why?" "Well, I forgot something there the last time we went there, that's all," I said. I was hoping we would be going back there soon so that I could retrieve it. I hated lying, especially to Dad. "Oh." Dad paused, thinking. What is it you lost? A magnet. It was the only thing I could think of. A magnet? Well, we'll get you another one. No problem. Dad smiled at me and patted me on the back. No, you can't, Dad. This magnet is special. I was getting desperate. Don't worry, Kieran. I'll get you a special magnet. You don't understand, Dad. The magnet is part of my chemistry set. I need that particular magnet. My chemistry set is useless without it. It was the silliest lie, but sadly the best I could come up with at short notice. This magnet is part of your chemistry set? Well, what would a magnet be doing in a chemistry set? He could see right through my lie. I swallowed hard. Well, you see, Dad, Square and I have, Square alone really has revolutionized the ordinary chemistry set. He has devised a new concept which combines chemical energy with magnetic forces to produce a new energy source. We are working on it. This magnet is super important. We can't go on without it. I see, he said, nodding his head in understanding. Wow, this is some project. Your friend Square must be very brainy. Yeah, Dad, he is. He was going to let me go. I'm proud of you, son, taking such a keen interest in science. I nodded. Thanks, Dad. This was unbearable. Kieran, he said. Yes, Dad? What were you doing up in the local hills with a magnet of such importance? Oh no, I thought gloomily. He knew I was lying. I had been rumbled. I was testing out the strength of the magnetic field at high altitude, I blurted out. Dad laughed. I wasn't sure why. All right, Kieran, you win, he told me. You may go to the local hills with Dulles if your mother agrees. I gave him a hug. Really? Sure. You seem desperate enough. Lord only knows why. I ran indoors to tackle phase 2 of my quest. Mom regarded me for a moment when I asked her. Oh, well, I don't see why not, she said. You've been good lately. You could go tomorrow after school if your brother agrees to drive you. Thanks, Mom. I gave her a big hug. She smiled. Then I remembered. Tomorrow night was sports trials day, like today. It would have to be the day after sports day. How about Saturday, Mom? I have sports trials tomorrow. Okay, Saturday, even better. Thanks, Mom. Just then, Komi came out onto the porch. What's going on? He asked. Where is Kieran going on Saturday? To local, I replied. What for? Not telling. He was my friend again, but only just. I wasn't going to tell him any of my adventure secrets. This was between Square and me now. It's the project Square and I are working on. Oh, that, he said. I'm not interested anyway. You can go to local by yourself, see if I care. With that, he went to hang out with Dad. Hey, Kieran, I heard Dad call out to me. Dad? I went out to him. Could you write me a report on your findings? He said with a wink. What findings? The strength of the magnetic field on the local hills. I'm interested. I panicked. I had to find a way out and quick. I hadn't a clue how to test the strength of a magnetic field. Even Square couldn't make up some figure for that. He probably knew the exact figure, or at least he could find out. I can't, Dad. Why not? It's top secret. Oh, I'm sorry, Dad. I shrugged apologetically. No, that's fine. I respect secrecy. It's okay. He smiled at me. I smiled back. I had won. Commander Froniket looked at the screen, puzzled. For 5 days now, all he could see was his face looking back at him from the screens in his systems control unit. Now he could see a picture of something else emerging. It wasn't clear, but he could just about make out the silhouette of a man. He was saying something. No, it was a boy, and he was speaking into a nucleophone. It was dark. Commander Froniket wheeled himself in his swivel chair to the next table. A microphone was standing there. Excited, he spoke into it. Calling Commander Bonsok urgently, over. Systems control unit requires presence of Commander Bonsok, over and out. He swung back to the screen. He pressed the switch on the monitor. The picture became clearer. It was definitely a boy. He could see his face clearly now. He increased the volume. Yes, Square, the voice said. Tomorrow night. Doolis is driving. What? Really? You're going to recharge Professor Potty by the weekend? Wow. How can you work so fast? How do you know what to do? Okay. Yeah. Commander Froniket looked closely at the screen. The boy was still speaking. He suddenly had a hunch. He pressed a key on the monitor. The boy's face was magnified. Next, he pressed the illuminator key, and the dark room the boy was in brightened up. Commander Froniket smiled. The boy was Girin Demba. Perfect. Target spotted, he typed onto the screen. He pressed the key for pause. Then he sat back and put his feet up. Commander Bonsok had something to celebrate, and he, Commander Froniket, was not going to miss out on the party. When Commander Bonsok arrived, Commander Froniket was waiting for him. Yes, Froniket, what have you got for me? He asked impatiently and sat down on one of the swivel chairs in the office. I have found something you'd be pleased about, he said proudly. Fire on then. Commander Bonsok nodded, his arms folded across his chest. Remember the activated quantoscope we sent out to Falrus beyond line Decimark? Yes. What about it, Froniket? Well, remember how the system failed, and I could only see my face on the screens despite all my efforts to set it right? Yeah, I remember. We said it was because it was a prototype. What exactly is your point, Froniket? Commander Bonsok's patience, as usual, was falling steeply. At that time, I figured out that someone had somehow found out about the technical drawbacks of my invention. I thought that someone had figured out that placing a mirror in front of it would reflect back the energy. Well, I was right. Someone had. In fact, 2 people had. 2 boys named Tawam Takenan and Girin Demba. Commander Froniket paused to let this new information sink into Commander Bonsok's mind. He got the reaction he was looking for. Commander Bonsok frowned. Why are those names so familiar? He asked presently. Commander Froniket smiled. They are the 2 principal targets of our program, he replied, clicking his heels for effect. They are, shall we say, the 2 most wanted boys around here. He grinned, revealing teeth in need of some urgent dental work. Commander Bonsok grinned. I think I know what you're getting at, Froniket, he said, his eyes twinkling. You're not just a pretty boy, are you? Froniket glowed. I'll take pretty, if you don't mind, sir. Commander Bonsok was happy to indulge in this little game. Not at all, Froniket. I'll give you pretty. Do tell more. It was going to be another good day. He could feel it in his bones. Well, those 2 boys are clever, all right, but not as they think they are. They forgot about the most basic of phenomena. Commander Bonsok raised an eyebrow. An attempt to raise the other proved difficult, resulting in an unintended sneer. therefore attempt abandoned. Basic phenomena, Froniket? Yes, something natural. Afraid you lost me, Froniket, Commander Bonzok conceded. They forgot about rain. Froniket loved to play this game. He, intelligent, informed about subject at hand. His listener, not so bright, not a clue about subject at hand. Rain, Froniket? Confusion was written all over Commander Bonzok's face. Yes, rain. You see, the mirror factor works only if the surface of the mirror is clear. With moisture on the surface, it is no longer an efficient reflector. A dense medium such as water disrupts the interaction between the particles of ultraviolet nucleomagnetic energy, thereby interfering with the reflective properties of the mirror in reaction to the power source. Our smart boys forgot this basic principle. Froniket, forget the heavy-duty science and get on with the story. Commander Bonzok was feeling a little dim. He did not like feeling this way. Okay, I'll explain. What happened is that when they brought the mirror within a few meters of the quantoscope, our plans to spy on the goings-on of the Denver family were ruined, as you know, but not for long. A few hours ago, it started raining in Koponti in Falrus. I had this confirmed by the Met boys. With the rain, my luck started to change. The screen began to clear up. At first, I did not know what was happening. Then I worked it out. I heard Kiran Demba talking to his friend about a secret project involving a new energy source. I got interested and kept watching and listening. Then it dawned on me, they know the whole deal. They have figured out the potential application of my invention and were planning to put it to use. That little weasel, Dakinan, has built a prototype robot, and I reckon they are planning to power the robot with my invention. We have to stop them. It's all happening in 3 days' time. Froniket was out of breath. Commander Bonzok was in deep thought. He got up. Call Nellit, Froniket, he said in an angry voice. Tell him to speed things up. In particular, I want that Takanan boy out of Falrus by Friday. Understand? No problem, Commander Froniket nodded grimly. Go on, Froniket. Carry on your good work and get Nellit on to this job fast. Keep watching Falrus and keep your eye on that Demba boy. And something else. Get new quantoscopes into Falrus. Design another batch which would be hard to detect. I want results, Froniket. You'd better make sure I get them. And with that, Commander Bonzok stormed out of the room. He was still in control. This was just a minor setback. He would see to it that this mission got accomplished. He wasn't about to be stopped by a bunch of alien kids. Chapter 7. If I hadn't been so close to him, I would have missed it. I was sure of that. It had happened so fast that I could not believe my eyes at first. But I was certain it had happened. I was 100% sure. It was sports day at last, the day I had been waiting for. I had trained hard all term for this, and the results showed during the heats. I was chosen to represent my class in the 3-legged sprint sack race, in which 2 teammates ran together with a leg each in a common sack. Square was my teammate. Gomi had just missed out on selection. He didn't seem too bothered by this. I think he was saving himself for his serving lessons anyway. I had been devastated when Dad told me he could not come, even more crushed than Dulis and Pago, who were also competing for their respective classes. I wanted my father to see me in my hour of glory. Mom tried to cheer me up all evening yesterday, and I finally said I understood. Dad had some very important work to do. Besides, she was coming, she added. Wasn't her presence enough? She pleaded. Put that way, I had to relent. My race was due to start at 2 o'clock. The school playground had been decorated and tracks laid out. There were banners everywhere declaring it to be St. Farron's School Sports Day, as if I needed reminding. The butterflies doing somersaults in my lower abdomen were doing a fine job already, I thought. There was a feeling of expectation in the air as parents streamed in from the school gates and began to make their way to the spectators' stands. Doolies had gone to fetch Mom in the car just before the family's first race, Pagos. I attached myself to the school gate, hoping for an inspirational glimpse of my mother before my race. There were crowds of proud and otherwise parents, other relatives and friends everywhere. Where was my mother? I looked frantically around. Then I spotted her. She was wearing a polka-dotted dress, my favorite. I waved. She saw me and waved back, beaming and giving me the thumbs up. Dooley did the same. He was calm, collected. I wish I had his nerves. I was better now, though, after seeing Mom had made it. I turned and walked towards the start line. The spectators began to settle. Proceedings began just after 2 o'clock. There was a long speech by our headmaster, Mr. Portier, not one word of which I managed to catch. I was far too focused on my upcoming race. There followed shorter speeches by various random guests whose names I didn't catch. Then the races finally began, with the younger children going first. There was a lot of laughter, cheering and clapping as each race ended. Square and I were watching from the start line with Mr. Buana. Pago won his race. Mum went mental with joy. When Pago went to receive his trophy, I thought she might get certified there and then. The other mothers were generous in congratulating her, I noted. Even the mother of little Renshu, who came last, was hugging Mum and telling her well done. In return, Renshu got a kiss from Mum, as big as that she gave Pago. It was all good-natured. But Square and I had to win nonetheless. We are going to win, Giran, Square nudged me, terminating my absent-minded reverie. I nodded nervously, turning round to face him. I realized he too was looking at the scene around us and had come to the conclusion that I had, that losing a race at Pago's age was no big deal. You still got a kiss from the winner's mother. At our age, things were a little different. Serious pride was at stake here. Sure thing, Square. Of course we'll win. It goes without saying. We trained hard, didn't we? We gave each other high fives and laughed. A dry, nervous laugh, which relieved some of my tension, but not all. Soon, our race was announced. Square and I got ready in silence. This was the moment of truth. On your marks. Get set. Go. And we were off. Nothing strange happened until halfway through the race. Square and I were in second place when suddenly, for a second or two, Square was gone. Gone. Disappeared. Confounded, I had continued with the race in a daze, only to see him at my side a split second later. I wondered if anyone else had noticed. I looked around at my fellow competitors. They seemed tunnel-visioned, seeing nothing but the finish line in front of them. I glanced around at the crowd. They were going mad with frenzy. Square and I won. I knew why. I had run unimpeded for the crucial second he was missing. I had had an unfair advantage over the other paired runners in the race. It was enough to make us win, quite apart from the fact that we had trained jolly hard. Mom was in seventh heaven once again. My brothers were almost matching her on the decibel scale. I should have been happy, but instead I felt odd. I was confused and worried. I glanced at Square. He was being carried overhead by a small crowd, including his father. He seemed normal enough. What had happened during the race? Was this one of his high-tech tricks? Somehow I thought not. I couldn't help feeling that something sinister had just happened. The butterflies in my stomach refused to go away. The artificial ozone layer was coming on nicely, Book thought. He was a lot more relaxed than he had been 2 weeks ago when things were looking desperate. Half of it had been completed now, and Operation Animal Kingdom was well underway, thanks to Dovania Suvas's diffraction pattern experiment. He was disappointed, though, that his nucleomagnetic transpotron had still not come alive. But he was still hoping and praying it would work, and soon. He had checked and rechecked all his calculations, and every one of his hypotheses was in order. It just needed a brainwave to get things moving. He felt confident that one day he would wake up, and there it would be, his long-awaited source of inspiration. Whilst life at work was looking bleak, life at home was even duller, bordering on depressive. It was now 3 days since his whole family had gone on vacation to Pasquando in Amperia. It was very lonely now in 37 Horse Avenue. He wished he could be with them now. He had hardly seen his family for over 2 weeks now, even when they were in Dres with him, except for the occasional chat with Jiren, ever since the 90-hour week was suggested by the powers that be for all the scientists working on the top priority case in hand. More news from Krambati confirmed his suspicion about the old world. More nucleomagnetic waves had been detected. This suggested that not only was there life in the old world, but it was also advanced, intelligent life. If that were indeed the case, then the sooner their ozone block was completed, the better. Anyone who had the intelligence to develop nucleomagnetic energy could not be trusted with a neighboring galaxy's sun. Obviously, more research had to be done on just what lay beyond line Decimac. It was a good thing Professor Veltambradakas, who was an expert on the old world, had made it his personal priority. The latest puzzle for Book, though, was the sudden increase in the number of lost, expensive-looking diamond rings. These were being found all over the place now. Every day, Miss Kando or someone else would hand one of these in as lost property. Saki Volten had asked him if he'd lost a ring a while back. The same type of ring was turning up all over Falrus now. The press called it manna from heaven. He'd heard that the rate of marriages had shot up since these rings appeared. It seemed young men were taking the hint and proposing. Nothing wrong with that, Book mused. If he hadn't already asked the most beautiful woman in the world to marry him years ago, he would have asked her this week. Chapter 8. I couldn't understand why anyone would go for more. We had been all over Pasquando the whole day, but my brothers wanted more exercise. After supper, I flopped into bed and didn't emerge until 2 hours later. Surely a vacation was meant to be restful? My brothers, however, were unaware of such a concept. Feeling refreshed, I wandered out of our seaside cottage towards the beach. There were a few other families in cabins and tents nearby, but none in the immediate vicinity. We had the run of the place. In the 4 days we had been here, Dulis and Gomi had put in a lot of hours of decent surfing already. Dulis was 10 kangris richer, poor Gomi the same amount poorer. Mum was sitting with Pargo and Rippo on the sand. I made my way over. I knew I wouldn't be welcome in surfing world, so I opted for the next best. Hi, Mum. She was listening to Pargo read. She looked up at me. Hey, Giran, sleep well? I rubbed my eyes and stretched. Did I just? Not too bad, Mum, I said dreamily as I dropped onto the sand beside Pargo. You look like you've just woken up from a nightmare, Giran, Pargo said to me. Thanks for the compliment, I replied cordially. I knew I looked awful, but my excuse was I couldn't find my comb. Gomi had packed some of my stuff with his. Besides, I could always swim to wake myself up fully. What are you reading, Pago? I asked. I turned his book so I could read the title. Ooh, Hidden Treasures in the Vizal Sea. You don't think there really is treasure there, do you? I teased. I sounded like Dulles. Sure there is, Kieran. Pago seemed certain. No, there isn't. Yes, there is. No, there isn't. Mom, isn't there? Mom looked at us smiling. I'll tell you a story. Then you can decide for yourselves. A story? Okay, fine. I was just about in the mood for one. I had nothing else to do anyway. Pago snuggled up to Mom, squashing Rippo in the process. I rested my back against a coconut tree. A huge coconut hung ominously above my head. Don't move, I said to the coconut, pointing at it. Mom and Pago laughed. I didn't think it was funny. If the coconut fell, my head would split open. It was that simple. I, however, was too lazy to find another spot to recline in. Once upon a time, Mum began, there was a king who had 2 sons. King Hybok? Pago inquired. No, Pago, not King Hybok. This was long ago, before King Hybok was even born. The king's name was Toki, and his 2 sons were Yoneri and Bamu. Yoneri was the elder and Bamu the younger. Now, one day, the king decided to test his 2 sons to see which one was fit to succeed him. He was getting old, and he wanted to pass his title and kingdom on to his successor, but he didn't want his kingdom shared between his 2 sons because that would have caused a division amongst the people. So he set out one day to see an old man renowned for his wisdom. The old man lived in a small hut far away from the king's palace. Welcome, your majesty, the old man greeted the king when he saw him coming. I know why you are here. I can help you with your problem. How do you know about my problem? The king asked, surprised. It is not a secret that you are tormented, your majesty, the old man replied. You want to know which of your sons is worthy of your throne. Everyone is talking about it. Naturally, I heard about it from passers-by. The king was disappointed. He had wanted to hear something different. A bird had flown in and told the old man. A hand from heaven had written it on the wall, not simply having heard it from passers-by. Perhaps this old man is not such a guru, the king thought. Maybe I should go to someone else, someone who speaks with the night owls and who walks on water. The old man knew what the king was thinking. It disappointed him that the king failed to see his true wisdom. He decided to teach him a lesson he would never forget. Your Majesty, he said to the king. The king answered, interrupting his thoughts. I have a solution for you, the old man said with a gleam in his eye. Please, tell me, the king said. At last, he was going to get some wise words from this old man. Go to the Vizal Sea and search for treasure. Return home and then send your 2 sons to the Vizal Sea with the same quest, but don't tell them whether or not you found any treasure upon your return. The one who returns with the same result as you will be the next king. Thank you, wise old man, the king said happily. He bid the old man farewell and set off to the Vizal Sea. It took him 30 days and nights, and by the time he got there, he was so thirsty he drank the whole of the Vizal Sea. There was no treasure to be found on the dry seabed. Ah, no treasure, the king said to himself. Now I can return to my kingdom and then send my sons here in search of treasure. Whoever comes back to say there is no treasure shall be king." And so he set off back to his kingdom. On his way back, it rained and rained so hard that the Vizal Sea was soon re-established. When the king got back, he called his sons to him and said to them, "Go to the Vizal Sea, my sons, and search for treasure. Then come back and tell me what you find." So his sons set off separately to the Vizal Sea. The day after they left, the king fell ill. None of the doctors in his kingdom could determine what was wrong with him or how to make him better. In desperation, the king sent for the wise old man, fearing that he would die before he had solved the dilemma as to which of his sons should succeed him. When the old man arrived at the palace and saw the king, he laughed. No one understood why he was laughing. But the old man said simply to the king, "Open your mouth." The king opened his mouth. To his utter disbelief, gold coins began to fall out of his mouth, hundreds of gold coins, enough to fill a treasure chest. The king was distraught. "So there was treasure in the Vizal Sea," he lamented. "But I thought there wasn't. Little did I know I had swallowed it all when I got thirsty. What shall I do, old man?" The old man laughed again. "Don't worry, Your Majesty," he said. "Wait for your sons and see what they say." So the king waited. Then suddenly, 30 days before his sons returned, the gold coins disappeared. The two sons arrived on the same day. Yoneri went up to his father and said, "Father, I searched the whole of the Vizal Sea and found nothing." Then Balmo appeared before him and said, "Father, I searched the Vizal Sea thoroughly, and lo and behold, I found these gold coins." And he showed his father a bag full of gold coins. The king recognized them as the coins he had swallowed. "So, boys," Mom addressed Pago and me, "which of the sons should the king have made his heir, Yoneri or Balmo?" "Yoneri," I declared. "No, Balmo," Pago retorted. "Why Yoneri?" Mom asked me. "Because there weren't any gold coins in the Vizal Sea. His father had swallowed them, so they couldn't possibly have been in the sea at the time he got there. Besides, he arrived at the same conclusion as his father had, which was no treasure found." My argument was solid, even airtight, surely. Who could knock holes in my reasoning? "Okay," Mom said slowly, nodding. "I see where you're coming from, Giran. But remember that the gold coins disappeared before the sons got back. Could they have been magically transported back into the sea, perhaps by the old man?" "No, that's not possible," I argued, "unless Balmo stole them and then reported back to his father that he had found the coins in the Vizal Sea." "But Balmo, like his brother, was miles away when the king discovered he had swallowed the gold coins," Pago protested. I fell silent, thinking. But I could not make up my mind which of the two sons was right about the treasure. On the one hand, Yoneri was the rightful heir because he had agreed with his father and that there was no treasure, which was the condition the king had set. But then Balmo too had come to the correct conclusion, one that his father had failed to arrive at. This one was turning out to be a hard dilemma for me. Pago saved my pride by asking the question I was dying to pose, but felt would jeopardize my position somewhat. "So, Mom, I gave up. Which of the sons became king then?" "Ha, neither," Mom replied. "The king couldn't make up his mind either. In the end, the old man became king instead." "Oh no," Pago and I cried in unison, laughing. "The nasty trickster." Maybe Gomi and Dulis will find the gold coins, I said, and we laughed again. We watched my two brothers as they rode the waves of the Vizal Sea. I suddenly wished I were with them instead of sitting here listening to fables designed for Pago's entertainment. I got up and told Mom and Pago I was going to visit Square. Don't be too long, Mom called out as I walked off, my feet sinking deep into the soft sand with each step and the wind blowing in my face till my eyes watered. I won't, I said and waved back. Mom, did you just make up that story? Course not. It's a genuine piece of Farusian folklore. Yeah, right, like Miss Hepworth had a genuine heart of gold. Square's family holiday home was to be found further down into the village. The Takanans were not sea people like us. They preferred the mountains, rumbling, camping, that sort of thing. We liked that too, but in much smaller doses. Since we all arrived together 4 days ago, I had hardly seen Square. Now, on this lovely warm evening, I decided the time was right to pay my best friend a visit. Square was different. He seemed more distant than he had ever been since we became friends as toddlers. He seemed less keen to have me in his company. He argued all the time with Kefra, but above all, it was his attitude towards Professor Potty that baffled me the most. First of all, the day after sports day, I managed to persuade Dulis to drive me to the local hills. After much haggling, finally, the offer came down to 3 kangarees. I accepted. I paid up. Gomi teased. I bore it. I went in search of Square. Auntie Wayna told me he was in his tree house. I went up and joined him, telling him excitedly that we could go to local at last. Square had given me a cold look. Not interested, Kieran, he said icily. I froze. The tone of his voice was downright scary. Come on, Square. I tried to lighten the mood. I gave him a friendly pat on the back, the kind he often gave me. Remember what you said. This could power Professor Potty if ever his energy reserve failed. Think how important this could be for him. Square had surprised me by snapping at me. I don't care about Professor Potty anymore. I can't be bothered about his energy source. With that, he stormed out of the tree house and down the ladder. I tried to follow him to his room, but he slammed the door in my face. Kefra was out with friends at the time, and Auntie Wena was out in the backyard talking to a neighbor. I didn't want to disturb her, so I made my way home, tears stinging my eyes. Secondly, 2 days before leaving Driss, Gomi and I had gone to Square's place to play. We had been surprised to find Professor Potty lying face down in the garden, but Square had explained that there was a fault he had wanted to repair. Professor Potty had seemed all right to me the day before. Square had shocked me by pressing the reverse key on Professor Potty's programmer. What had even surprised me more was that nothing had happened. There was only one explanation for that. Square was no longer himself, literally. I found my friend sitting on the front porch of his house, reading a book on circuits. He did not even look up when I got to the stairs. I stood there for an awkward moment, wondering what I had done to deserve this cold treatment. Hi, I said eventually, plucking up enough courage to make the first move. Hi, he said nonchalantly, glancing up just long enough to ascertain my presence. He looked down at my feet. Where's Professor Potty? I asked, deciding to be friendly, even if he wouldn't. He's out fishing with Kefra. Oh. There was another long silence. I shuffled my feet. Would you like to go for a walk? I asked finally. I'm reading, Square said moodily. Come back tomorrow. We could play with Professor Potty then. All right, I said, shrugging my shoulders and trying my utmost not to show my disappointment. Say hello to Auntie Wena and Uncle Ino and Kefra. See you tomorrow. See you tomorrow. I walked back to our cottage, puzzled. The rest of the day passed by in a haze. Gomi and Dulis talked about nothing but surfing, and Pago now wanted to know if there was treasure in the Prolino Sea. I didn't feel like sitting through another fairy tale, so I went to my room and put the light off. I lay on my bed thinking about Square until supper time. At 11, we rang Dad. He had just arrived home from work and he was missing us, he said. He had a word with each of us in turn. When it came to my turn, I told him about Professor Potty. If you had him with you, Dad, I said, he would do all your cooking and washing up for you. And he would be good company too. He can talk, make jokes, even dance. Is that right? Dad chided. Seems as though this robot friend of yours is very advanced. Where did you find him? My friend Square and his sister built him, I confided. Square says he is the most sophisticated, Dad interrupted. Yes, sophisticated, that's the word, I answered gratefully. He's the most sophisticated robot in the world. Square says he can even teach himself new things not included in his original program. That's super, remarked Dad. Mom interrupted at this point. Now, Giran, let your father get on with his supper, she said sternly. Good night, Dad, I said to him. Good night, son, Dad replied cheerily. He didn't sound hungry to me. And don't forget to say your prayers tonight, will you? No, Dad, I said. If I do, the monsters in the old world will come and carry me away in my sleep. I remember those empty threats from back in the days when I was Pago's age. It had been the most effective way of getting me to say my nightly prayers. These days, more was required, particularly on vacation. Good night, Giran, Dad said, laughing, and hung up. Little did I know that by telling my father about Professor Potty, I had effected a turning point in the destiny of my galaxy. I had no idea what difference my little nuclear telephone conversation with Dad was going to make to our lives from now on. I did forget to pray that night. I was playing tongue twisters with Dulis, Pago, and Gomi in my room till late. By the time Mom came to disperse us, I was so exhausted I collapsed into bed, falling asleep before I hit the bed. I slept like a log. It was no surprise then that when exchange number 31 took place, I was none the wiser. I was to wake up in a bed on the other side of line Decimac the next morning. My unexpected visit to the old world had begun. Chapter 9. Commander Bonzog could not believe his bad luck. Up to this point, his future had looked so bright. Frustration and anger engulfed him as he stood trembling in the warm room. He glanced at his watch. It was now 4 a.m. The president would be here any minute now. He was in the control tower at Fort Jugush. This was where the attack on planet Falrus was going to be launched from, if ever there was going to be one. By the look of things, he wasn't so sure anymore. He was standing in a room full of security nuclear vision screens. Out of 100 screens, only 2 had clear images on them. The rest were either blank or showed the interiors of incinerators. The security guys were trying their best to get the screens sorted out. They were feverishly working at the controls. They had been here all night, the poor chaps, no doubt dragged out of their warm beds by the duty guard from last night. Commander Bonzok went into the next room. Same story here too. No pictures to be seen on the screens. It was a sad sight. 6 years of planning had gone into this operation. 6 years of solid hard work down the drain. A door to his left opened abruptly and he froze, presuming it was the president storming in unannounced. But it was only the director of wave signaling and detection. Commander Bonzok let out an audible sigh. "What is it, Froniket?" "I have to inform you," Froniket said in his usual stiff voice. "We have finally lost all hope of visual contact with Falrus using nucleomagnetic wave pulses," he declared. Commander Bonzok glared at him. What do you mean, lost all visual contact?" He had trouble breathing. "I mean, our pulses are no longer getting through, and our previous continuous waves are not reaching their target anymore. Our line is dead, as they say." The fat man looked as if he were going to explode. He had to make a real effort not to grab Froniket by the shoulders and scream at him. In a shaky voice, he managed to say, "Well, do you have an explanation for this loss of contact?" "Yes," Commander Froniket replied gravely. "Well, let's hear it." The Falrusians have constructed an artificial ozone layer along line Decimac. Not only is it a visual shield, it also prevents heat and any form of matter getting through to their solar system. This is the first of its kind ever built. The only other ozone layers I have heard of are the ones surrounding Earth in the second galaxy, and that over our half of the galaxy, which was destroyed in the Big Bang. Even so, this ozone block, as it is sometimes called, is one up on the natural ones. It is direction sensitive. It blocks our pulses and waves, but is capable of letting through those from Falrus coming the other way, should they decide to send any. I never thought the Falrusians had such advanced technology. At the moment, only sound energy from us can get through, but ever since they discovered that sound too can be blocked by the ozone block, from a Dr. Suvanas' research, they have begun developing a sound block as well. All this I was able to pick up from our cameras until they too began to fail. "Can we build our own ozone block?" Commander Bonzok asked. "I'm afraid not." Commander Froniket looked worried. "Our sun is too small to sustain an ozone layer. Not enough solar energy is generated." If only we could replace solar energy with nuclear energy from atoms. Unfortunately, that's not possible. We would have to tap Falrus' solar energy to build our own ozone block. Commander Bonzok grunted. Froniket, he said, looking up at his tall colleague. "Yes?" Commander Froniket responded, almost at attention, which happened to be his natural pose. "Give me some space." "Yes, as you wish." He marched out of the room, closing the door quietly behind him. Commander Bonzok's mind was racing. All was not lost, at least not yet. This situation was what contingency plans were designed for, and he still had a few of those tucked up his sleeve. He was thankful for his highly organized brain. Another person with a seemingly watertight plan like his would have sat back on his laurels and relaxed. Not him. He was a natural pessimist. This was the key to his success. That was why he was second in command of the districts. No, these Falrusians were not going to get in his way. He'd put them in their place, right next to the district people. He was still thinking about what he'd like to do to the Falrusians when the president's arrival was announced through the intercom. He was at attention when the president breezed into the room with his usual entourage of guards. The president waved his guards away as he indicated that he wanted to be alone with Commander Bonzok. They left noiselessly, closing the door behind them. "You wanted to see me, sir?" Commander Bondoc said, still standing at attention. "Sit down," the president snapped. Commander Bondoc decided to opt for the lamb to the slaughter approach. It might help his case, he decided. "If you don't mind, sir, I should like to stand." The president was not impressed by this show of humility. "I said, sit down," he bellowed, snarling. Commander Bondoc was suddenly more than happy to oblige. He was not one for standing for long periods anyway, and this meeting could potentially go on for hours. He sat down at the desk in the center of the room, opposite the president. "Listen carefully to what I have to say, Bondoc," the president addressed him, regarding him intently. "After I've had my say, you can have yours." His voice now was almost gentle. Commander Bondoc knew it was a bad sign. He swallowed hard. "I am rudely awakened at 2 this morning by Commander Falsikan, who says there is trouble at the Jugush. Nucleomagnetic interaction is dwindling. The nuclear vision cameras are misbehaving, and most of all, the exchange program is failing." I say to myself, no, this is all a mistake. Commander Bondoc is on the job. He's an expert, a professional. This may be a temporary setback, but so what? We all have those from time to time. I shall let my competent officers deal with it. I go back to bed. I even start to dream again. Then an hour and a half later, I get called again, this time by Commander Shriek at the Ejana base. The newly constructed nucleomagnetic war missiles would not get through Falrus's new Wholesome block, for it contains a nuclear-sensitive repellent. That's when I really get mad. I say to myself, what is Commander Bondoc doing to sort this mess? I ring your office thinking you would be there sorting things out. Silly me, you are in bed. I can hardly believe what my brain is conveying to me. So I called you out here to hear your side of the story. So here you are. Tell me your side of the story. The president managed a wry smile. Defend your miserable self, Bondoc, because believe me, I am more than a little peeved here. I get hauled out of bed. I expect everyone else who works for me to be out of bed too. It's just the way it's supposed to be. Commander Bondoc cleared his throat to kill time, while his brain creaked under the strain of fast thinking. There were so many things going against him, he didn't know which one to tackle first. After a quick debate with himself, he decided to start with what he felt was the worst of the bunch, the nuclear vision screens. About the faulty pictures on the nuclear vision screens, sir, he began. Our little cameras hidden in rings were not a success because we sent too many of them to Falrus by transport run. A lot of the Falrusians began to wear them, which was great at first because we got lovely pictures of their every movement. Then there was this campaign to rid the planet of them by the government because there were too many and it was becoming a disposal issue for them. In future, we shall send them in small batches to more discreet places. As it is now, most of our cameras are stuck in refuse tips or incinerators, and that is why we only have screens showing pictures of rubbish. The president was eyeing Commander Bondoc with contempt. And how are you going to get more of these fancy cameras into Falrus when our transportrons can no longer get through because of this ozone block of theirs, huh? Commander Bondoc had seen this coming. He had an answer ready for his boss. Transportrons and nucleomagnetic radiation cannot get through, sir. But before the Falrusians develop a sound block, we can transmit and detect sound waves through the ozone layer. I'll have the whole of Falrus bugged, sir, With our advanced technology, it should be no problem at all. Well, I hope not, for your own sake, the president said. What is this I hear about a prototype robot? Surely it's not what I think it is. Commander Bonzok started to squirm. Bother, how did the president find out about that blasted robot? Yes, sir, unfortunately it is. It was developed by this boy by the name of Takanan, exchange number 30. I told you about him. You remember him? We were going to take his sister instead, but you insisted we get the boy. Yes, I remember, the president acknowledged. Give me details, Bonzok, not waffle. Is it really a super intelligent robot with a mind of its own? Yes, sir. It's the same robot that could benefit from the prototype quantoscope. Then why did you allow Girendemba to tell his father about it? Why didn't Takanan's double prevent that? Isn't that what he was trained for? Who is this double anyway? Heine Cutish, sir, from the 5th District. He was a late entry into the conversion program because of the change of plan, but he learned quickly. We will send him instructions via the sound energy system to undo the damage as quickly as possible, sir. And why wasn't Girendemba snapped up earlier? Wasn't he in the same batch as Takanan? Yes, sir, but there was a delay due to the ozone block. We were only just able to squeeze him through a hole in the block round about midnight. I'm afraid no more exchanges are possible until we find a way to beat this ozone block. However, the good news is we can instruct the existing exchange candidates to take on tasks, and the Falrusian children over here are enough for the information we want. You didn't get the king's son? The president asked, disappointed. No, sir, he was to be next, Commander Bonzok replied. Get him, Bonzok, if it kills you, the president said. He's the most important of all. Yes, sir, Commander Bonzok replied. He was now well and truly beaten. There was no way he was going to get his hands on Bunda Shepwat through the ozone block. His future now looked bleaker than ever. Only 24 hours ago, he had been staring power and success in the face. Now, even demotion to a god seemed like a pipe dream. Chapter 10. It was Tuesday, the 11th of August, a special day in the life of the Dembas. It was Kenan's 40th birthday. Book had sent her a musical card via Transpotron. He had got to work at 5 a.m. today, expecting good news from Professor Veltam Bradakas. He couldn't wait. Already the ozone block was completed, and he had the team working on the sound block as well. He felt very pleased with himself this bright and beautiful morning. Morale in his department had resumed its usual status. Now, people at least managed to smile at the most unfunny of jokes by Bolsani Venistas. Everyone did his or her best to make the operation progress steadily, and progress it was. The solar energy plant at Dionysi had been modified to deal with solar energy tapping. All of the solar panels and energy converters had been fitted with tapper alarms that recorded a high-frequency signal via an amplifier on a recorder inside the control room. And the ozone layer itself, the brainchild of Balit, had been the star of the show. It had been modified to act as an invasion-proof blanket over planet Falrus. At breakfast in the canteen, Book spotted Professor Bradakas looking around, obviously looking for someone. He waved to the old man and went over to him. Good thing I found you, Demba, he said, relieved. Been looking for you all morning. Yes, Voltin told me you were looking for me, Book replied. So, what's the big news, or will it have to wait until we're out of the canteen? You know the rules, never discuss top secret matters in public places. Walls have ears, Book said, smiling. Professor Bradakas nodded. Good point, Demba. He looked around him. Everyone seemed to be tucking into their meal and not paying them any attention. What I have to say to you, Demba, is to do with the old world, Professor Braddicas said, barely above a whisper. I figured as much, Book replied. Let's talk in my office later. They finished their meal in silence. 20 minutes later, they were back in the science department. Professor Braddicas's office was empty. His secretary was on leave. He and Book sat on opposite ends of his desk. I have been doing a lot of research lately, Book, he began. Book smiled. Who hadn't round here? The old man placed his elbows on the desk and leaned closer to Book. I think I know what's going on. Book made no comment. He raised an eyebrow. I think we are dealing with professionals here, Book. Not only are they advanced in their thinking, they are also brutal in their actions. I have finally figured out what it is we are up against. I am going to tell you the story so far from the top. He shifted in his seat as Book waited patiently. He had a lot of respect for Professor Braddicas. He was Book's role model. I thought you should hear this first, Book. My first clue was the discovery of nucleomagnetic rays coming from beyond line decimark. That spelled interplanetary nucleomagnetic transmission. As you may well imagine, I was puzzled, very puzzled, if all life on the universe at present were the same age. Then it would be impossible for anyone to have developed interplanetary nucleomagnetism. Of course, I realized there was a possibility of my being pig-headed and a bad loser in the race for scientific development. But my suspicions about my findings worried me. I mean, we have intraplanetary nucleomagnetic transportrons. Why couldn't another planet have developed interplanetary ones, going one upon ours? I pondered this for weeks. Then one night, I was preparing to go to bed when it hit me. It was such a simple explanation. I marvel at how I could have missed it all that time. If you don't mind, I'll tell you exactly how it was that I came to find the answer to my big problem. Of course I don't mind, Professor, Book said encouragingly. Go right ahead. I don't want to miss a single detail. Thank you, Book. You're a good listener. Well, my wife has this awful habit of making me read my Bible every night. She keeps telling me I might as well please God while there was still time, for the end was nigh for us. You know, that sort of thing. Breathing religion down my neck. Book knew that sort of thing. He smiled, thinking of Kenan and the countless Sunday mornings he had been dragged to Mass along with the kids. The professor continued. She shoved my old Bible at me, and having no choice in the matter, I chose a page at random as I usually did. Am I glad I chose that page that night? The professor was getting animated. Book sensed an exciting bit was to come. He waited. The bit I read was the bit where Jesus said to the disciples of John the Baptist, I think it was Matthew 9:17, if my memory serves me well, that new wine is not poured into old wineskins because the wineskins would burst and the wine would pour out. That was when it came to me. The medium. The old wineskins would burst because they were not the right media to contain the new wine. So also, the reason no one could possibly have produced nucleomagnetic waves was that the medium was not right for it. Not yet. Whereas ordinary nuclear energy and indeed short-range, i.e. intraplanetary nuclear magnetism, is time-independent. To transmit long-range or interplanetary nuclear magnetism requires a medium which is pre-Big Bang. The reason being that the nuclear energy from nuclei of atoms can only be generated to a substantial level if enough energy levels have accumulated to interact with magnetic forces. Not only were the energy levels inside radioactive atoms inadequate, the energy levels in the atoms of the particles of the air were insufficient as well. To acquire the number of energy levels that will be adequate for long-range nuclear magnetic energy requires many more years than our planet has existed, Book. That's the reason your interplanetary transportron won't work. You would need to wait another 1,000,000 years for the atoms of the air and radio elements to acquire more energy levels. Anyway, to get back to the problem in hand, I started to toy with the idea that the old world existed before the Big Bang. Book frowned. Yeah, I know, my friend, Professor Bradekas quipped. Totally ludicrous idea, I am well aware. Surely not possible, is it? Book asked. This is what I thought initially, Book. I couldn't mention it until I had more evidence. I had to see this through on my own. I risked losing credibility as a respected scientist if I came up with a crazy idea no one would take seriously. It became a personal battle. For days, I was obsessed with this notion. I thought so hard about it, I thought I would go mad. At some point, I actually considered giving up and aiming for a nice, quiet retirement. Book smiled. Professor Bradekas retired? He couldn't imagine it. The man was already of retirement age when Book graduated from high school. You'll never guess what gave me my next clue. Book had no idea. The Bible again? He volunteered. No, not the Bible, Professor Bradekas said, laughing. Those diamond rings that kept popping up all over the place, he said. The rings? Book asked in disbelief. How could those have helped? You don't know the half of it, Professor Bradekas said, enjoying unraveling this mystery to the flabbergasted Book. Those rings, Book, contained the biggest pointers of them all. First of all, they contained cameras. Cameras? Book was astounded. Yes, cameras, the old man replied, nodding vigorously. But listen to the rest of the story first. When Voltin first showed me one of them and asked me if it belonged to me, I thought nothing of it at first. Later, I got curious about it. The shiny metal looked unlike any other metal I had seen before. It appeared to be better quality than gold. Out of sheer nosiness, I had it analyzed by the metallurgy boys. They sent it back asking me to take a look at the mass spectrograph. Its atomic number was more than 1,000,000. That woke me up. I knew I was onto something big, so I had the ring checked out by security. They found a camera concealed inside. This ring was my proof of pre-Big Bang existence. From my calculations, only an atom which had existed before the Big Bang could have so many energy levels, as demonstrated by the high atomic number. The cameras and the nuclear magnetic waves from the old world were further proof that whoever lived there was spying on us for some reason. I think I know that reason. To tap our solar rays, Book offered. After all, the sun is tiny, not likely to sustain them for much longer. Wrong, Book, Professor Bradekas said. I have just been telling you these people, and I use the term loosely, life forms would be a better choice of word, have developed interplanetary nuclear magnetic energy. That, my friend, more than compensates for solar energy, as you know. No, these life forms are gaining intelligence to spring an invasion on our solar system. With their advantage over us of having interplanetary nuclear magnetic transportrons, they figured we would be easy prey. Fortunately for us, our ozone block not only prevents a potential interplanetary solar energy vacuum pump, it also protects us from invasion, Book said. Palit Droba is a genius, the professor said. Dovania's diffraction theories were also excellent for Operation Animal Kingdom. I would say her research saved the day, in fact. Your team is full of brain boxes, Book. None of them measure up to you, Professor, Book said and meant it. Then he suddenly had an idea. Professor, those rings, couldn't they be used to generate the energy to run the interplanetary nucleomagnetic transportron? You said yourself they had sufficient energy levels. Checkmate, exclaimed the old man, not able to contain his excitement. Book's expression changed when he remembered something else. But the medium, Professor, he said downheartedly. Our atmosphere is too young to have acquired enough energy levels. We are back to square one. The professor was stroking his bushy mustache. Not exactly, he said in deep thought. There is a way out. You see, once we generate enough energy from the nucleomagnesium rings, that's the new name I have coined for these pre-Big Bang metal rings, the inadequacy of our atmosphere can be compensated for. The only problem is we need a certain breed of highly advanced robots, advanced high-performance prototypes to deal with this. Book almost fell out of his chair when he heard this. Why, just the other night, Kieran had been describing just such a robot that his friend Square had built. He would have to check it out, sure, but it sounded good. The old world aliens had developed an interplanetary nucleomagnetic transportron. Who knew when they would develop an intergalactic one? It wasn't just about saving his own planet. It was about saving the world. Boy, did he have work to do.